Sekeres and Price special live edition in the wake of the Norris Trophy win for Quinn Hughes and, of course, the signing of Tyler Myers. Sorry to jump on you, Matt. Wasn't sure if your mic was working already. There you go. Welcome, everybody. Part 2 today.
And a presentation of Yellow Dog Brewing today, Blake.
It has been and will continue to be a presentation of Yellow Dog Brewing. And don't forget, there's specials all month long at Yellow Dog, including the Yellow Dog Chase My Tail Pale Ale, the 355 milliliter 12 packs on special for the month of June. Look for it on sale at private and government liquor stores.
And Big Blue Line news. Quinn Hughes becomes the first Vancouver Canuck in 54 years of NHL competition to win the Norris Trophy as the league's best defenseman. And Tyler Myers back for at least 2 more years, maybe 3, as the Vancouver Canucks continue a busy last 24 hours of re-signing their own pending unrestricted free agents, Blake. I know you want to start with Tyler Myers, this being the biggest news going forward with regards to the club. And of course, more, as I mentioned, more activity out of the Vancouver Canucks, an extraordinary 24-hour period where you've now re-signed Tyler Myers, Dakota Joshua, Teddy Bluger, and executed the Ilya Mikheyev trade. So we'll start with Myers, Blake. What did you make of the deal?
It's 1 year too long and about $500K too much for me. These are small quibbles. Is this going to sink them? No, but I was really hoping they were going to blow us away and say that it was a 2-year, 2.5 AAV. That would have just been like, holy cow, these guys really do walk on water. But I was half expecting that to be the case. And so this is kind of like, okay, we could probably live with that, but I'm not gonna be as vocal in my support as I have been on a lot of the previous deals, which have been really tidy bits of business. This is fair, but I don't think it's a gorgeous deal like a lot of these other ones have been.
I feel exactly the same way. We were expecting a hometown discount. There is no hometown discount here. Now, what you have to realize, Tyler Myers had a very good season. Tyler Myers has a market as a big right-handed defenseman, and Tyler Myers is a necessary component to the Vancouver Canucks in terms of the penalty kill, which is already losing Ian Cole, which may well lose Nikita Zadorov as well. So I know you've teased me about fretting about the penalty kill, but they did need to bring in more reinforcements for the penalty kill on defense and up front. But this is a 34-year-old who still takes his fair share of penalties, who has to be a third-pair defenseman after this coming season if he's not already going to have to make that transition this year. He had a huge familial preference to stay, as we've talked about, a Kelowna resident in the offseason, a Vancouver resident during the season. I'm with you, Blake. It's a year-long at $3 million per with a full no-move clause over the first 2 and just the 12-team no-trade list in year 3. If they had gone 2 by 2.5, the deal that you I would have been fine with the full no-move clause for 2 years. Fine.
Right.
Give him certainty that he's going to be here for the full 2 years if he's willing to do a 2-year deal. But on a 3-year deal at $3 million per, it was a little too player-friendly, given the leverage you had over the player in this regard.
Now, this deal looks a little bit better almost, Matt, if they provide depth down that right side going forward. Because if they're going to protect Tyler Myers, and I suppose you could argue, well, he'll play the second pairing this year and they'll bring in help next year. That's possible. But he can't be your second. You can't be leaning on him a year from now, I don't think, to be the second pairing defenseman. So sometime in the next 12 months, they're going to need some help on that right side to fortify the top 4, because I don't think you want a 35, 36-year-old as your top 4 defenseman right now. We're not talking about Zdeno Chara. We're not talking about a guy who was a transcendent talent that has got lots of room for regression. He's been good. He's been, like, let's face it, he had a really nice season. No one's going to take that away from him. But I don't think this should be your number 4 defenseman. I mean, maybe this year they could get away with it, but I still, if you want to make sure you're a Stanley Cup contender, I still don't think that's the case.
He had a good enough year that I think they can pencil him in for second pair this year. There's a little bit of a finger cross there that's going to hold up over 82 games. or at least the first 60 before the trade deadline.
Yeah.
But I'm with you in that regard. If you were willing to walk on the player, and I think it would have been a more interesting question, is Myers ready to walk on the Canucks? But if the Canucks were ready to walk on the player, brings us to the alternatives, right? Or perhaps the still options, Blake, if you're right, and they need another right side guy. So pure second pair right side guys on the market. Chris Tanev, he may not get to free agency. Apparently, Dallas making a huge push to re-sign him. Sean Walker, not really a Rick Tocchet style defenseman, a smaller, more of a puck mover guy. Now, some people might argue that's needed because Hughes is really their only pure puck mover. Alexander Carrier, who we saw in the Nashville series, so I thought accounted himself pretty well. I think might be a player in ascension. Or guys who are far more likely third pair guys who can masquerade as second pair guys. That's the Matt Dumba market. That's the Yanni Hakanpää market. Big Desharnais out of Edmonton. Those would have been the alternatives if you're on the market for a right shot defenseman, second to third pair guy, and are not bigger game hunting. And incidentally, Blake, when we talk about the contract, we should also mention AFP Analytics, who nailed the Dakota Joshua contract to the dollar. They had Myers on a 2-year deal at $3.17 million. So maybe he doesn't do our 2 at 2.5, but can you go to $3 million over 2 years? At that point, I would have gone full no move clause. But the third year, I think, is the one that a lot of amateur Canucks capologists are going to be hung up on here.
Yeah, it's still when you look at the defense core right now, and I said this at the time that they signed Tyler Philip Roenick and Myers are the same price as they were a year ago with the combine. In fact, I think you're saving a couple $100,000 even. So, through that metric, they've kept costs manageable. And if Nikita Zadorov is not back, you still have some money around to basically have the same priced blue line as you had a year ago. You might be able to save money in the big picture for months to come in the trade deadline. So through that prism, I don't know that you'll be able to play that same game with the forward lines and say they cost the same. But at the same for the same bodies, you might have to make some concessions. We've talked about this already. The fourth line might have to be a little bit more of crossed fingers and hope and prayer bets, with three guys making $900K. That might be the way that the Canucks are able to cut corners and save a little bit here.
So right now, Blake, you're looking at $12 to $13 million remaining. You absolutely must have a top six winger.
Yeah.
Right. You need a third pair left defenseman unless you're planning on going with unless you sign a righty and go 4 righties, or unless you're willing to give that spot to Mark Friedman or a combination of rookies. You've got $1 million earmarked or thereabouts for Artur Shilovs. And today we heard they're in the market for a journeyman goaltender that's going to cost some money. So I think you're right about minimum salary guys. I also think you're in the market for everybody who would take a salary that's fully variable in the American Hockey League, a $1.1, $1.2 million player. We had talked on the Daily Show today that the Dakota Joshua signing and the Teddy Bluger signing, effectively spending all of the cap savings more that you got at the Ilya Mikheyev trade, likely meant that you're not going to get Nikita Zadorov back. And I think that's only more likely at this stage of the game after the commitment to Myers, because you have spent well and above the Ilya Mikheyev signings at this stage of the game. So, we asked on our poll question today, do you want Guentzel and spare parts or a mid-level shopping spree? It would really be Guentzel and spare parts at this point, if you're willing to go to $9.5 million for a winger. And it tells me further that Vancouver Canucks management is not very confident that they can get Jake Guentzel's name on a contract.
Yeah, it's clearly there was a calculus made. I mean, I don't think it's any coincidence that the trade of Mikheyev spurs on a bunch of signings here. They clearly felt like they were backed up against the wall, looking at their puzzle pieces and going, this isn't going to fit with this amount of room. And that release of $4 million, allowed them now to maneuver a little bit. And of course, you don't want to give away your leverage. Make all these signings official before that Mikheyev trade, and then appear like you're in desperate measures in order to clear that space. So probably done in the right order, even though mathematically they could have announced the signings first. This just makes them a little bit more sense politically, and make sure they don't take too big of a haircut on the Mikheyev trade. And now, I mean, is it just straightforward though, Matt? They just wait till July 1st from here on in and make their signings and they move on? Or is there one last preparation move here on the draft floor?
Could well be. Not sure what's out there. Needless to say, if they have a trade ready to go or know that they're close on a trade, that changes much of what we're talking about with this available cap space. Of course, they don't have a ton of tradable assets, Blake, and subtracting from the team, like making a Höglander trade at this stage of the game, like even if it were for a terrific winger out there, upgrading the winger situation, that's not a net at wing, right? You would still probably need to go out and earmark some of that money for a forward. So I don't necessarily think, unless they're peeling future picks, that the trade route at this stage is more likely. I think you're right that the July 1st shopping is a little more likely at this stage of the game. Take on my lists, Blake, of right side defensemen if you're willing to go there. Walker, Tanev, Carrier, Dumba, Hakanpää, Desharnais. I've got the price points here. Like, do you see that, or do you want to play and talk about guys on the left-hand side as opposed to Mark Friedman?
Well, I mean, I think if they're going right side, they're probably going bigger fish hunting. Like the only reason they would shop on the right side is if somebody of significant talent was willing to sign for a reasonable number. And
right, because the depth is there, right? Like you got Wilson, you feel better about your right side.
Like they don't want Friedman starting every night. Like in a pinch, they could start Juleson every night. They wouldn't love that, but I think they could stomach that on October the 12th or whatever, at the very least. So
is that Brendan Dillon? Is that more of a puck mover guy, like an Eric Gustafsson? We is that Joel Edmondson? We talked about this last week on the show. The options on the right side, even from a depth perspective,
are a little bit better.
Are a little bit better than the left side, which is kind of odd for a UFA class, right? The right side defensemen are usually so scarce that people go to get them re-signed, and there's fewer of them out there. But you can make the argument that the left side class is a little bit weaker heading into this free agency. The other thing we should say about the signing, Blake, the team run it back has won the day. Everybody who wanted the Vancouver Canucks to keep mostly intact, a playoff team, a Pacific Division winning team in the regular season, has gotten their way. They brought back Bluger, Myers, and Hronek, of course. So, and Dakota Joshua. So they have brought back a lot of the iffy guys at this stage of the game, and they're staring down the barrel of only losing, really, outside of players of the Ian Cole variety. They're looking at only losing the two guys they made the big in-season trades for.
And the diehard fans, I think, see the cost of Zadorov and get a little scared. I wonder if the casual fans, who are a much bigger constituency, if they're going to be a little disappointed that the guy that had so much personality, swagger, and impact late in the season, if the loss of Nikita Zadorov irks a few of the casual fans that don't necessarily understand the intricacies of the salary cap and how big a hit that would be for them to sign him to something that's too big. So
at this stage of the game, I think what's already out there, and we got the Dom Lucian tweet up after finally being done with overpaying Tyler Myers, the Canucks decided to keep overpaying Tyler Myers for 3 more years. The industry, I think, was bullish on the Canucks' work on the Hronek deal. I think the industry quite liked the Teddy Bluger deal, like the Dakota Joshua deal. This is really the first contract they've signed here this offseason that has some people perking up and going, okay, curious, perhaps a bit of an overpay there. So we'll see where they're at on July 1st. But to answer your question, I'm more likely believing that we've got a July 1st scenario on our hands more so than a trade on the draft floor this weekend scenario.
Yeah, I mean, the trade on the draft floor is you're going to have to use your imagination as to what all that is. It's just far easier. You're looking for zebras instead of horses at that point. So I think it's likely the draft floor scenario for the Vancouver Canucks, and we'll see. I mean, I refuse to believe that they don't have a splash move in mind here. Like I refuse.
The last move is going to be the winger that isn't Jay Gensel.
Right. So who the heck is that? But I like somebody's coming to the Vancouver Canucks with a cap hit of $6 million or more. Like that is happening.
It's that next tier of winger, because here's the thing: if you don't get that tier of winger, Blake, then you are looking at Garland, Joshua, or maybe both playing in the top 6. The forward ranks are not very deep now, so you absolutely need a top 6 winger to displace someone like a Pius Suter or like a Connor Garland to the third line and give yourself that strong top 9 that we talked about. If they get one more winger in, I think they can look at their team and say, hey, much like last year, we feel really good about our first 9 forwards, and we think we have some developmental possibilities, or at least profile guys that can get us by on the fourth line and continue with the team. That for the most part, while it didn't have necessarily huge depth of scoring into the second half last year amongst their forward group, had a superior defensive group amongst their forwards that helped them keep winning in the second half last year when the scoring dried up.
Are you leaving open any possibility of a surprise trade away of a marquee winger that they already have, i.e. a Besser or a Garland? They've already poo-pooed the Besser possibility, but in order to upgrade there, trade away a $5 million player to get a $7 million player from somebody else.
As I have been mentioning to you privately after I mentioned it publicly at the end of the season, there's still a sliver of me that wonders about Elias Pettersson and whether he's going to jibe with the organization going forward. We know that Rick Tocchet and Pettersson didn't necessarily see eye to eye, so I always allow for that possibility that you have a head coach and a star player that may be butting heads, and that perhaps if you're bowled over with an offer, you make the move. We know that Pettersson's no move kicks in next year, so you've got to be convinced on him now. This is like your one chance to trade him, or at least trade him on the open market. I don't think they're trading a winger at this point. They just traded a winger. They're weak there. Alvin mentioned more speed. That's the best place to be able to add speed. I can't see them trading a winger. Now, Saravelli mentioned something to us last week, which was, I got to say, rattled the ground beneath my feet. And that was, would they be susceptible to a She Loves offer sheet if somebody is wholly convinced that this guy is a franchise or starting NHL goaltender right now? But, barring something highly unlikely along those lines, I think I'm reasonably convinced at this stage that we're talking about July 1st and we're talking about some free agents added to this mix and not a splash trade at this stage of the game.
Yeah, there's just not a lot of assets for the Vancouver Canucks to work with on that front. But I mean, I think they're ready to be creative, and I think they know deep down they can't run it all the way back and just think that that's enough. Like they know there needs to be additions and tweaks made to this team.
Yeah, and I think and we've discussed this scenario as well, that you for the most part run it back. Okay, you're going to have a different top 6 winger than Elias Lindholm. You're going to have a different left pair defenseman than Nikita Zadorov. You run that into next season. You evaluate where you are at U.S. Thanksgiving, and then you start putting the wheels in motion to execute more trades and to build up before the deadline. I think I can see that scenario playing out right now. In fact, there's a part of me that thinks that's the most likely scenario at this stage of the game. And Blake, that's not necessarily a bad thing. Like if you've got a bunch of teams that are going out there on Monday and blowing their brains out with bad contracts because there's newfound cap space around the industry, then I kind of like if the Vancouver Canucks are, lying in the cut, a little sneaky and going, all right, we're going to target this guy and this guy, much like last year, the offseason and free agency, and plug those guys in and we're going to make a commitment to improving the team in season via trades. And who knows, maybe you get surprised by a prospect or two as well.
They just got to make sure that they keep their head above water to start. They, that they're a few games above 500, by the middle of November. They don't have to be leading the league, but just, they're competitive. They're in the vicinity. They haven't dug themselves a hole. That would be the only concern there.
And on Tuesday, we'll get the schedule and we'll be able to say, okay, they need a good start because look at this road trip in October and the markets it takes you through.
Yeah.
Let's move on to Quinn Hughes winning the Norris. First of all, he wins in an absolute rout, and he wins in a rout over Roman Josi of Nashville, not Cale Makar of Colorado. So all that breath we wasted this year, Blake, talking about Hughes and Makar having the reputation and how much would that be worth when it gets down to brass tacks and Norris Trophy voting. Cale Makar got but 9 first-place votes to 172 for Quinn Hughes. In fact, Quinn Hughes gets all but 22 first-place votes. He's on every single ballot. And as mentioned, the first Vancouver Canuck to ever win this most prestigious award. And he does so in his first year as captain of the hockey club. So
the answer was that recency bias was a thing, but it just didn't happen to hurt Quinn Hughes because Cale Makar was relatively consistent throughout the season, nipping at the heels of Quinn Hughes. But it was Roman Josi's second half that, of course, took him from way back in the field to did he finish second in scoring or near to second anyway? So people did validate Josi's second half of the season. They were immovable when it came to first place and Quinn Hughes. So
Quinn Hughes, more than the margin between Hughes and Josi is more than double the margin between Josi and Makar.
Yeah.
So, the margin between Hughes and Makar is astronomical. Hughes absolutely destroyed Makar in the head-to-head. Like I said, 172 first-place votes to 9. Cale Makar had 21 fourth-place votes, 18 fifth-place votes. I haven't even done the quick math here, but I think some people may have left him off the ballot. He finished that far back in comparison to Quinn Hughes. So you're anointed and now reigning, defending Norris Trophy winner heading into next season as the Canucks captain.
And this is why the voting also matters. If we didn't know the votes, if there wasn't the transparency, I think you'd be curious. You'd be torn up a little bit, wondering, did he just get passed? Like, are people convinced? Now there's no wondering. Like, people know who Quinn Hughes is. People respect who Quinn Hughes is, so we can put that to bed. People know that Quinn Hughes is emphatically one of the best defensemen in the league. There's no wondering about it.
He actually finished 7th in Hart Trophy voting. And look, we had talked about that Hart Trophy voting, Blake, where he was a candidate, was going to be a little more difficult because of the trio at top, Kucherov, McDavid, and the eventual winner, Nathan McKinnon, not to mention Austin Matthews and all those goals. So those guys finished top 4. Then it's Panarin, Hellebuck, Quinn Hughes 7th. He got 1 second place, no first place votes there, but 1 second place vote, 4 thirds, 3 fourths, 26 fifths. So he was on 34 Hart Trophy ballots. And
I wonder,
JT Miller got on a Hart Trophy ballot as well.
I wonder what it would have taken for Quinn Hughes to get serious Hart Trophy love. Like, he had 92 points. If he's 105 points, gets to the magical triple digits, do you think that tips this guy? I think it would take extraordinary measures for him to win the Hart, but to get in the top 3 for his season to be so special, so as to necessitate more attention, would 105 points have done it? He was on that pace for a long time. For about 55 games, he was on that pace.
Yeah, I think he would have had to have certainly eclipsed 100. And look, I'm not even sure 105 would have got top 3 on this ballot. But you're quite right; it would have given him more traction. And frankly, I think this year and winning the Norris is going to give him more traction for both trophies next season.
I think my point is, I think it would have necessitated like history-making stats this year, given what the forwards were doing. I think it would
to some degree, because the other thing is you were not just battling against one other candidate You had to convince Kucherov voters. It wasn't him. It was you. You had to convince McKinnon voters, and you had to convince Connor McDavid voters. And I think, and Matthews voters. And I think
and Matthews voters. Yeah, exactly.
Extremely difficult. Anyways, special live edition of Sekeres and Price here, a presentation of Yellow Dog Brewing. We had a big show today with the Dakota Joshua, Teddy Blueger, and Ilya Mikheyev news. And Blake may have a big one tomorrow as well.
There will be more tomorrow.
Hey, one thing about this management group, it does a lot of acting. Like, they are in the headlines across the National Hockey League more often than not when it comes to the offseason. So we'll talk to you on Sekeres and Price on Friday's edition.
Hey, everybody, if you're enjoying what you're seeing here, then follow along with Sekeres and Price on YouTube. I promise more content coming.
The kids call it subscribe on YouTube.
Well, how about liking it?
Do that as well. Smash it right now.